She walked into the bank like any other customer, quiet, modest, and carrying nothing but a small purse and a gentle smile. Dressed in simple clothes and soft shoes that had clearly seen better days, no one gave her a second glance. To the tellers behind the counter, she looked like someone who might ask for directions or withdraw just enough to get by for the week. So when she softly said she wanted to withdraw $500, the staff barely paid attention until they started whispering. The woman noticed the glances, the smirks. One young teller even chuckled under her breath, nudging a colleague as if the request was somehow amusing. To them, this wasn't a serious transaction. Just a poor, unimportant lady asking for more than she probably had. But instead of reacting with anger or embarrassment, the woman calmly stood her ground, observing everyone, her eyes sharp beneath. The kindness. Then, without raising her voice, she leaned forward and said something that made the room fall silent. She asked to withdraw $2 billion right there, on the spot. At first, the staff thought they'd misheard her. Was she joking? Confused? Or just completely out of touch with reality? But what happened next would turn this seemingly ordinary bank visit into a jaw-dropping story that no one in that room would ever forget. Who was this simple woman really? And why did she come prepared to shock everyone in the room? Stay tuned, because what she revealed next changed everything. The bank manager was quickly called over. He walked in with a forced smile, the kind you use when you're not quite sure if someone is being serious or pulling a prank. He asked the woman to repeat herself just to be sure. Calm as ever, she nodded and said it again. I'd like to withdraw $2 billion. People nearby stopped what they were doing. Phones were lowered, conversations paused, even the security guard shifted in his seat. It was as if time itself had slowed down in that small bank lobby. The manager, trying to stay professional, asked her politely, "Ma'am, may I ask why?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her purse, not for a checkbook or an ID, but for a small folded envelope. It was worn, with creases from being opened many times before. She handed it to him without saying a word. He opened it, read a few lines, and his expression changed instantly. The smile faded. His eyes flicked up to her face, and for the first time there was no trace of amusement. Still, no one in the room had any idea who this woman really was. She gave off no signs of wealth, no hint that she came from money or power. No bodyguards, no designer handbag, no loud voice demanding attention, just quiet confidence. And now, growing confusion on the manager's face. Was she the secret? Heir to a massive fortune? Was she testing the bank? Or had she stumbled onto something no one was supposed to know? The whispers started again, but this time they weren't mocking. They were filled with curiosity and a touch of fear. Everyone was wondering the same thing. Who exactly had just walked through those glass doors? The manager quietly asked the woman to step into his office. She followed him without hesitation, her step steady, her expression unreadable. The curious eyes in the lobby followed her until the door clicked shut behind them. Inside, the tension thickened. The envelope she had handed over wasn't just a note. It was a document, one with signatures, legal seals, and a name printed at the bottom that made the manager's hands tremble slightly. It was a name he had only heard whispered in private board meetings, tied to massive offshore accounts and high-level corporate dealings. He cleared his throat and asked her again, this time more carefully, how exactly she came to possess this document. She looked at him, her voice soft but firm, and said, "My husband left it for me, along with instructions. He told me that if I was ever disrespected for being just a woman, I should remind people exactly who I am." Meanwhile, outside the office, the story had already started spreading. A few customers had recognized her face, or thought they did, connecting it to an old news article, one involving a business tycoon who had disappeared suddenly years ago, leaving behind a mystery and an empire with no clear heir. But nobody had ever linked that empire to the quiet woman who now sat behind the closed door of the branch manager's office. The staff who once smirked were now whispering nervously. The young teller who had laughed earlier was pale, watching the door like it might swing open and change everything. One employee began searching through internal bank records, looking for any account that matched the woman's details. What she found made her sit back in disbelief. Still, no one really understood her motive. Was she here to claim what was rightfully hers, or to expose something buried deep within the bank's own vaults? Inside the manager's office, the atmosphere had shifted from tense to almost electric. He sat across from the woman, holding the document as if it were made of glass. The legal stamps, the offshore account details, and the coded banking instructions matched something he'd only ever seen in confidential files. But what unsettled him the most was her calmness. She wasn't angry. She wasn't demanding. She was simply waiting, like someone who already knew the outcome. The manager excused himself and stepped out to make a phone call. But it wasn't just any call. He dialed the bank's regional director, then the legal department, and finally a private number only used in emergencies. His voice was low, but the panic was starting to show. Staff nearby noticed the sweat on his brow, the tight grip on his phone. Whatever this woman had brought with her, it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about secrets, old ones. Down the hallway, the employee who had checked the internal system found something even stranger. An inactive file, locked behind multiple levels of clearance, with her name on it. The account was dormant, flagged years ago under special handling. But the numbers linked to it weren't ordinary. It wasn't just one account. It was connected to several high-profile transfers, offshore holdings, and something labeled only as Project Gemini. Meanwhile, word had quietly spread beyond the walls of the bank. A luxury black SUV parked outside. Two men in suits stepped out. They didn't speak to anyone. They just stood by the entrance, scanning the lobby with practiced eyes. Security noticed, but didn't intervene. The manager walked back into his office, his face pale, his hands slightly shaking. He looked at the woman and said, "We may need to speak to someone from the board." She simply nodded. "I expected that." The woman sat in silence as the manager tried to steady his nerves. Outside, the presence of the two men in suits hadn't gone unnoticed. One of the senior staff quietly asked the security guard if anyone had called them, but no one admitted to it. They weren't from the bank, they weren't police, and yet their posture and calm presence suggested they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Inside the office, the woman glanced at her watch, not with impatience but precision. "They'll be here soon," she said softly. The manager looked at her, puzzled. "Who?" he asked. But she didn't respond. Instead, she placed a second envelope on the desk. This one was newer, crisp and sealed. "I was told to hand this over only if things reached this point," she added. His fingers hesitated before picking it up. As he opened it, his eyes moved quickly over the lines and then froze. His jaw clenched. He looked up slowly. This letter is addressed to the chairman," he whispered. "From your husband." She nodded. At that exact moment, the building's power flickered, just once. Just enough for the room to go dark for a heartbeat, then return. But it was long enough for systems to reset. When the screens came back online, something had changed. The woman's dormant account, locked and restricted for years, was suddenly reactivated. Not just visible, but live, fully accessible. And the balance showing wasn't just billions. It was more, much more. Enough to shift control. Panic quietly set in behind the scenes. Calls were being made that couldn't go unanswered. The suits outside the bank had moved. Now, standing just outside the manager's door, one of them spoke into a small earpiece and gave a single nod. And still, the woman sat there, silent, waiting, as if this moment had been planned long before any of them even knew her name. The door to the manager's office opened without a knock. The two men in suits stepped inside, followed by a third figure. An older gentleman, sharp-eyed, dressed in a tailored navy suit. The room fell into a heavy silence as he approached the desk. The woman didn't flinch. She looked up, met his eyes, and said, "You took everything from him, and now I'm here to take it back." The older man didn't deny it. Instead, he gave a slow nod, almost respectful. "He warned me this day might come," he said, "but I didn't think he'd have the nerve." His voice was low, controlled, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. The manager sat frozen, caught in the middle of something far beyond his pay grade. He didn't speak as the woman pushed the envelope across the desk. The older man opened. It scanned the contents, and his expression changed. What he read wasn't just a letter. It was proof, documents, records, and a legal clause buried deep in the original company's founding papers. A clause naming a woman as the successor to a multi-billion-dollar trust if her husband ever disappeared under unusual circumstances. And he had. The reactivated account wasn't just holding money. It gave her control, ownership, the bank, the board seats, and the assets hidden under shell companies. Everything was now under her name. Security footage from that day would later show the older man walking out, shoulders stiff, flanked by his men. He didn't say a word. The woman stood next. She turned to the stunned manager, finally smiling. "I won't be taking out $2 billion today," she said. "I'll be transferring everything." But just as she stepped out of the office, a phone on the desk buzzed. A new alert. Another account had just been activated, one no one had known existed in someone else's name. The room went still again as the phone buzzed once more. The manager picked it up, his eyes scanning the screen. A second dormant account, untouched for over a decade, had just gone live. But this time, the name on it wasn't hers. It was her husband's. The woman paused in the doorway, sensing the shift. She turned back, her calm now mixed with confusion. The manager looked up and said, "Your husband, he may still be alive." For a moment, everything hung in the air. Her grip tightened slightly on her purse. She walked back, took the phone gently from the manager's hands, and stared at the name glowing on the screen. A single transaction had triggered the alert, just one. A signal, perhaps, or a message. The bank remained quiet as she whispered, "He always said he had one last move left." Later that day, the woman left the building without the noise of cameras or a crowd. She didn't need applause. She had reclaimed her place, her power, and possibly a thread of a deeper mystery yet to unfold. The bank's employees watched her leave, not as someone simple but as someone unforgettable. The whispers of mockery were long gone, replaced by respect, awe, and maybe a little fear. In the weeks that followed, the bank was forced to make quiet changes. People resigned. Others were removed. And somewhere, far from that small branch, an account remained active, silent, untouched, waiting. This story wasn't just about wealth or revenge. It was about strength, about how a quiet woman, dismissed and underestimated, carried a truth that changed everything. And as the doors closed behind her, one thing became clear. Never assume you know someone's story just because they walk in quietly and ask for $500.